So the study that we are going to be explaining to you guys is about teacher expectancies. It was conducted by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson in 1966. So Robert Rosenthal was a psychologist who worked as a professor at Harvard University during the time of this study. His work focused a lot on self-fulfilling prophecies, or the effect that expectations can have on outcomes. The effects of expectancy can be seen in education, physical performance, and in a doctor's evaluation of mental and physical health. Rosenthal now teaches at the University of California, Riverside. Lenore Jacobson was the principal of the elementary school where this study was conducted, and she contacted Rosenthal with an interest in conducting a study like this, so that is the reason why the study was started. The main research questions that Rosenthal and Jacobson asked were how great of an influence might expectancy have on the student's potential performance, and more specifically, if teachers are made aware of students' IQ scores at the beginning of the year, could this information set up biased expectancies in the teachers' minds and cause them to unintentionally treat bright students different than those who are seen as less bright? If they do treat them differently, is it fair to the students? The research was important because the results of the experiment could change the way that teachers are trained to interact with students. If expectancies do indeed create disparities in education and are therefore dangerous, the teachers could be trained to not have expectations about student outcomes. It's also, this study is, and this question is also important because it brings up the idea of the fairness of intelligence testing and if it's fair to set up those teacher expectations about student performance. So the predictions of this study, Robert Rosenthal predicted that when the teachers were provided with the information, the teacher would behave, perhaps unknowingly, in ways that would subtly encourage the performance of the students who were seen as more likely to succeed. So that would create the self-fulfilling prophecy of actually causing those students to excel, possibly at the expense of other students who were labeled as less likely to succeed. So this connects to the class in a couple of different ways. One of the ways it connects to the class is when we talked about experimenter bias and the way that the expectancies of the experimenters can end up skewing the results of the studies or experiments that they conduct. And so in this case, it looked at the way that teacher expectancies could skew the results of student performance. It also connects to the discussion of cognitive development, specifically in the way that caregivers' expectations can determine developmental outcomes for the child. So if a parent has low expectations for the IQ gains of their child, the child will live up to that expectation and not reach their full potential. This study also connects to Bronfenbrenner's bioecological theory because it connects to the idea that a lot of different factors are going to influence the development of a child, and in this case it specifically demonstrates how information available to a teacher will influence the teacher and in their interaction with the student, which is going to influence the student's cognitive development.
So I'm going to lay out the methods in this study. The researchers decided on an experimental design in order to test for the causal relationship between teacher expectations and their students' performance in the classroom. An experiment is the only way to determine a potential cause and effect relationship. So the participants were all of the students and teachers at an elementary school called Oak School. The school is in a large town, a mainly lower middle class neighborhood. The experiment included all of the students in grades 1 through 6, and each grade had 3 classes, making a total of 18 classes in the experiment. And there were a total of 18 teachers, 1 per class. 16 of these teachers were female and 2 were male. The procedure was fairly straightforward. Near the start and the end of the academic school year, every student was given an intelligence test called Tests of General Ability. The researchers chose this test for a few reasons. For one, the teachers were unlikely to be familiar with it. It was also a primarily nonverbal test, and it focuses less on skills learned in the school, in the classroom, like reading and writing, and more focus on the ability to form and understand concepts. In order to create expectancy in the study, the researchers implemented deception in their procedure. The elementary school teachers were told that the children took a Harvard test of inflected acquisition, which is supposed to predict academic blooming in their students. Each teacher was given a list of names of students who had supposedly scored in the top 20% on this test, but in reality, there was no difference between the children whose names were on or off the list because those names were chosen based on random assignment. So, those students labeled by their teachers as ready to thrive and realize their full potential in the classroom were simply those who had been randomly assigned to the list. The independent variable in this study was whether or not the student was assigned to the list of unusual or gifted students. And then the dependent variable would be the change in the student's IQ score, the comparison between their score on the TOGA test between the beginning and end of the year. And to measure whether or not this had any significance, the experimenters measured the difference in IQ change between the experimental group and the control group.
So I'm going to be talking about the results. And it was pretty straightforward and as the research is expected. But the children who were picked to be gifted showed higher academic growth than other children. And this goes for the entire school, where teachers just tended to improve with the control children. But this was most prevalent in younger grades, as can be seen on this graph, where the younger grades will have a higher jump in average academic ability than the older kids. This also just shows great correlational evidence of the original hypothesis of the researchers, which was that the expectancy effect is real in life situations. This also led to later studies, such as the one done by Chaikin, Siegler, and Delegra in 1974, who performed an experiment in which they recorded the interactions between teachers and students, some of whom were randomly pointed out as a teacher as gifted. And after examining the videos that they recorded, they determined that teachers favored the ones that were said to be brighter by smiling more and making more eye contact and just making generally favorable reactions to them. And this study refined the ideas that teachers' expectancies of their students could affect more than just IQs. Robert Sternberg in 1993 also created a new modern intelligence test called the Trichiarchic Abilities Test that can measure 3 aspects of intellection that are analytical, practical, and creative. And this just shows the importance of not just IQ, but other intelligences such as book smarts, street smarts, or just creativity and art and that kind of thing. And Howard Gardner in the 1980s also went along with this theme, and he created a theory of multiple intelligences instead of an IQ test that gives scores based on a multitude of intelligences, which again just shows that teachers need to be spending more time not just on IQ, but also on arts and creativity and just general life skills like that.
Okay, this study was a landmark because it supports Bronfenbrenner's bioecological theory in that teachers indirectly influence a child's academic success. If teachers have a preconceived idea of how a child will perform academically, their expectations are generally supported. This is because teachers will subconsciously treat a so-called academically gifted child differently from a so-called less advanced child in the classroom. Teachers provide long-lasting effects on a student's academic success. Results show that education systems, specifically standardized tests, are biased, which leads to a series of trials and errors to correct and better the education systems. It's also a landmark study because it supports the nature versus nurture argument, which proves that genetics and environment both play a role in development. The limitations to this study include that the research seems to be most prevalent among early elementary school grades, primarily first and second graders, because the results did not carry throughout fifth and sixth graders. Authors provide several reasons for why this occurs. One of them is that younger children are more malleable than older children. And another one is that teachers of lower grades may differ from teachers of upper grades in their teaching styles. Another limitation is that the experiment was small and represented a small sample, which then makes it hard to generalize the results to the public. It's also not cross-cultural, so the education systems and the teachers' personalities and techniques can be different throughout the world. It could be improved if the sample was more diverse and much larger, because it would result in a more accurate and applicable data. Recommendations. In 2002, Rosenthal himself reviewed the literature on expectancy effects using meta-analysis techniques. He demonstrated how the expectations of psychological researchers, classroom teachers, judges in the courtroom, business executives, and healthcare providers can unintentionally affect the responses of their research participants, pupils, jurors, employees, and patients. So this proves that not only does this study apply to teachers and the education systems, but also various career fields. This applies for current students because if you obtain the confidence to succeed on tests or in classes, it leads to better outcomes rather than having low self-esteem. This statement proves the self-fulfilling prophecy that we earlier discussed. So an example of this would be if you say that you're going to fail a test, you will probably do bad on the test. But if you say that you're going to do well on the test, you'll do well on the test. For future and current workers, it's important to watch out for the great potential for biases to arise in the workplace. A common bias is that women are often given less challenging jobs or tasks due to low expectations of their bosses. This is not as common now, but it was more prevalent a few decades ago. For future parents, it's always important to support and challenge your child's success, but it's never good to create preconceived ideas about their abilities because it will affect them in the future.